I'm going to talk briefly about exits. So there are 3 exits on this side, and then you can also go into the hall here and move in this direction. So that's the public service announcement. Why don't we all get started in the right frame of mind and the right frame of heart by standing if you can for a prayer. And please remain standing. Right after the prayer, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. But first, we'll be led in prayer by Dan Davis of the First Pentecostal Church here in Baton Rouge.
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, first of all, we want to thank you for the privilege of living in the United States of America, for the privilege of living in the great state of Louisiana. We pray your blessings on our elected officials, that you would direct their steps. We pray specifically for Senator Vitter. You would direct his mind, direct his steps as he endeavors to lead and direct and to influence the direction of the United States and Louisiana. We ask all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. And please remain standing for the pledge. We'll be led in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag by Mike Walker, former Metro Councilman. Mike?
Let us all place together the greatest flag in the world. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mike. Please be seated. My town hall meeting is meant to be your town hall meeting, and the agenda is whatever you want it to be. When I first ran for the Senate, my very first commitment was to work real hard and truly stay in touch, including by having these in-person town hall meetings in every parish, every congress. And so I've done that, well over 250 and counting. That's why we're together here today, and I appreciate your coming out, because it obviously only works if it's a real conversation. So thanks for coming out. I'll get the conversation started, mention 3 key issues that I'm focused on, among others, and then we'll get right to your comments and questions. If you haven't already, use these forms that are available to just jot out your topic or comment or question. And I just use these to move around the room as efficiently as possible to try to get to as many topics and as many folks as possible. So we'll go from there. Thought I'd briefly mention 3 key issues that are also outlined in the handout you may have. First, Obamacare. As you know, I was a strong and active opponent of Obamacare. Its implementation, its history so far, unfortunately, has not convinced me otherwise. One of my colleagues, I think, was pretty accurate a few weeks ago when he called Obamacare and its implementation a, quote, train wreck, close quote. What's interesting about that is it wasn't a fellow Republican. It was the Democratic committee chair who helped draft Obamacare, who was a leading, very powerful supporter of it in the Senate. And unfortunately, I think it's accurate. Every week is a new wrinkle that's a bad news and a real horror story. One very recent wrinkle I'm particularly upset about, and I'm actively involved in trying to reverse, is a special rule, basically a special exemption for Washington for Congress. The amendment, there was language put in which I strongly supported that said every member of Congress, all of our staff, have to be in the same fallback plan as every other American. At one point in the debate it was called the public option, and now it's called the exchanges. And that, surprisingly, quite frankly, got in and passed. Well, since it became law, that's been causing all sorts of angst in Washington. And as a result of that and a lot of backroom lobbying by some Republicans as well as Democrats, quite frankly, and that's really sad, the Obama administration issued a new rule, which is a special rule for Washington for Congress. And so, first of all, it says that each member of Congress can decide if their staffs are even covered by this mandate to go to the exchanges. That's ridiculous because the law is crystal clear about that. And I can guarantee you, anyone connected with me, any of my staff, are following that law and going to the exchange, including me. But the rule also gave a big subsidy to follow all those folks to the exchange, which is unavailable to Middle America. Special rules, special exemption, special subsidy. This is ridiculous, and it's exactly what America most hates about Washington, and rightly so. You know, in this case, Obamacare is a train wreck. Okay, no problem. We'll pass a fix for Washington only. Well, what about a fix for America? And so I have legislation drafted to undo that special deal, to make sure every member of Congress, all congressional staff, the president, the vice president, all of their political appointees have to go to the exchange with no special deal, no special subsidy, and I'll be fighting for that. Second issue mentioned on the handout, which is certainly significant and a positive opportunity, is energy. You know, in the last decade or so, we've discovered through new technology, horizontal drilling, fracking, etc., that we have enormous American energy resources that we didn't know we had just a few years ago. And it gives us the prospect of real energy independence. It's already been a game changer for our economy because it's lowered natural gas prices in particular, and that's revived the whole chemical sector, certainly significant here in Louisiana and the Baton Rouge area. Paper and wood products, those manufacturing jobs have done a U-turn for the better. But we can go a lot further if one thing happens, the federal government gets the heck out of the way. Because that positive activity, particularly with natural gas, is going on where? On private land, where the federal government doesn't have as much a role. On public land, where the federal government does, it's very, very slow, offshore and on public land, like federal public land, like in the West. So we need to get the federal government out of the way and allow access and production to these great resources, as well as do other common sense things, including the Keystone Pipeline. Yeah. And finally, a topic on the handout that is very important that I've been engaged in is the immigration debate. A few weeks ago, we had a big debate and set of votes on immigration, on the so-called Gang of Eight bill. I was and am a strong opponent of that bill because I believe at its core it repeats the same mistake we've made several times in the past. At its core, that bill is amnesty now, enforcement maybe much later. Well, I've seen that movie before. It doesn't have a good ending. The amnesty happens the millisecond the legislation is passed into law. The enforcement never fully materializes. And so you don't solve the problem, you make it worse. That's exactly the experience of the 1986 immigration reform bill. That bill also was amnesty now, enforcement maybe later. And rather than solve the problem as promised, it quadrupled the problem. We had 3 million illegal aliens then. We have 11 or 12 million today. I don't want to continue the problem. I certainly don't want to quadruple the problem. I want to solve the problem. And to do that, I think we need to start in a step-by-step way with enforcement. And we don't just need more promises out of Washington. We've been promised enforcement 100 times. We need to execute. We need to verify, as Ronald Reagan would say, trust but verify. And do all of that and see it and feel it and verify it before we do anything else. And so that's what I'm continuing to fight for along with House conservatives because the U.S. House is not yet active. So I'll continue to fight on that. With that intro, let's get to your comments and questions in no particular order. When I get to you, please stand up. Paul Drexel, please give us an update and next steps on flood insurance premiums. Paul, where are you?
I'm back here, Paul Dietzel.
Dietzel, I'm sorry. Paul, why don't you elaborate?
Yeah, well, I know that it's a big concern in a lot of parts of our parish, as well as Livingston Parish and Ascension, and as well as down in the Bayou. If you could, I know that you've been doing a lot of work on to help make sure that those costs don't significantly increase for the people of our
Sure, Paul. It is crucial for the country, but particularly for Louisiana, for obvious reasons. You know, the good news from last year is that after only having very short-term, uncertain extensions of the flood insurance program, in some cases it actually lapsed, and so thousands of real estate closings would come to a screeching halt. We finally got a long-term reauthorization. The bad news is, after it was passed, after a lot of debate and discussion and a lot of testimony, only several months after that did FEMA and other outside experts say this could cause not just rate increases, which we expected, modest rate increases, but catastrophic, unaffordable increases in some cases, truly unaffordable increases. We need to stop that for two reasons. Number one, it's just unfair to the middle-class families involved. They've been following the rules every step of the way. They built their homes, in many cases, up to the flood elevation at the time. They followed all the FEMA rules. And then for things to change so that their rate didn't just go up, but was literally unaffordable in some cases, which is what is predicted in at least a few cases, that's not right. We throw them out of their homes. Secondly, it defeats the very purpose, the very goal of making the program fiscally sustainable. Because if you have tens of thousands of people leaving the program, not paying premiums, you're not going to get the sustainability. So for that reason, too, we need to fix it. We need a fix in FEMA, and we probably need congressional action. I'm pushing very hard for both with the rest of our delegation. And we had a good, productive visit of FEMA officials last week. I'm following up on that with a committee hearing that I've helped organize in a committee I serve on, and Craig Fugate, the head of FEMA, will be the primary witness. By the way, he is rumored to be on the short list for Homeland Security, job. And I convinced Mary Landry to join me on a letter to the president saying, don't even think about that until this issue is solved. Don't even think about Senate confirmation of Craig Fugate until this issue is solved. So it's not done yet, but we're moving in the right direction. We're getting a lot of allies from around the country because this has widespread possible impact, not just in Louisiana. So I'm a lot more hopeful and encouraged than I was, say, 2 to 3 months ago. There's no simple answer to that because it varies area by area, map by map. And so I'm not trying to avoid the question, but there is no simple answer to that. Now, the dramatic increases we're talking about would not be the norm. But, you know, even if they hit 2% of Louisiana, that's a huge, in some cases, devastating impact to communities. So I'm not trying to avoid the answer, but it really depends on the area. It also depends on FEMA doing its new mapping correctly, which we're fighting on. Bob Miller, when are you and other U.S. senators going to end this Afghanistan-Iraq debacle that's costing American lives? Yes, sir. Bob, where are you?
Thank you, Senator.
Yes,
I want to say, first of all, I appreciate all the emails back and forth to your
Sure.
office. Thank you very much for that. I'm not some tree hugger. I'm a guy that spent over 20 years in the United States Army. I retired as a lieutenant colonel. I'm proud of my service. But I look at these boys getting killed in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I say, this is ridiculous. Those people have been killing each other since Christ rode the mule. They're going to continue to kill each other long after we're dead and gone. It's not worth one more American life to give them, quote, security in those countries, because after we finally leave, guess what? It'll be just like it's been for the last 1,000 years. I think you, Senator Landry, need to be talking to other senators and members of the House and say it's time to stop this. If you don't think it's a good idea. I'd like to know why, but it's not worth one more American boy. Thank you very much.
Sure. Well, Bob, first of all, thanks for your service and all the other veterans here. All the veterans, raise your hand. Let's give them a round of applause. Thanks for your service, and I certainly have all the same concerns about our folks over there. Like almost every Louisiana family, we're directly affected. I have a young nephew in the Army in Afghanistan right now that we, of course, pray for daily. My basic answer would be this. Number one, we're getting out of both Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq is on a quicker, or is on a pace that started earlier, but we're clearly getting out of both places. Now, for the very security of our people there, we can't do that overnight. We can't do that in a week. If you pull out too quickly, you actually leave some Americans vulnerable at the tail end. So we need to be cognizant of that. And that's, I think, the biggest factor in terms of the pace of the pullout. But that's going on, and it's underway, and it's going to be virtually done within a reasonable amount of time. The second thing I would just add as a cautionary note is this isn't just about Iraqi or Afghani freedom. Particularly in Afghanistan, there's a very specific reason we're there, and it's because that's where the 9/11 terrorists were trained. And this is a direct connection, not just to Afghani freedom, but to American freedom. And we cannot allow other training grounds for Al-Qaeda the way Afghanistan was. And we can't allow that to happen. And I don't think it is going to happen again in Afghanistan. So it is a direct connection to American lives and American interests, but I certainly appreciate your comments. Is it about this, sir?
Same thing.
Yeah.
I want to know what the prisoners in because of 9/11 explosion and Sunday Trade Center, and we still haven't tried it.
We still haven't what?
Tried it. They've been in a
Well, the 9/11 folks were tried the moment they pulled off what they did. And I have no doubt where they're serving their time, and it's beneath us, not above us.
the one that was responsible never was. They were
Yeah.
Mastermind.
Well, I'm not sure what your question is. I don't think they should be tried, because I don't think it was a crime. I think it was an act of war. I think they should be held in Guantanamo. Guantanamo for the duration of the conflict, including if it's well beyond their natural lives.
What I understand, they get sent out back overseas.
Well, some of them are, and I certainly disagree with that. Becky Mangan, when are our Hispanic Republican congressmen and women and Republican governors going to reach out and speak to the Hispanic community about what the Republican Party stands for? This man, why don't you elaborate?
Well, I heard Susanna Martinez about a year ago explain how she came to the realization that she is at the heart a Republican. And I think that is something that the Hispanic community does not realize. They hold a lot of the same values, most of the values that Republicans hold.
Yeah. Family, education,
And
hard
reaching
work.
out to them in their own language is so important. So what can you do to garner support for Republicans to reach out to that community?
Well,
Educate them.
I think you make a great point, and I agree. There are enormous common values, like education, family, hard work. So we have plenty to offer and to relate to them on. What I can do is encourage that effort, help raise money for that effort. I'm a white guy, so I can't leave the spear on that effort, but you're right. Actual Hispanic Republicans can very effectively, and that is being organized. And it's also being organized, by the way, in terms of even tougher outreach, like in the African American community. Here in Louisiana, here in the Baton Rouge area. We've had a number of recent converts. The most notable is probably a state senator who's from Acadiana, Elbert Guillory. And that in Louisiana is an ongoing effort, which I'm certainly very supportive of. So you make a great point.
Well, I just want to say, I think it's important to do that to all the communities that think they're democratic and they're not really. But I really get tired of receiving requests for money from different organizations and never see any results with regard to that. So I would like to see that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll carry back that message because I agree with it. Why don't you explain to everybody, I know what it is, why don't you explain what it is and how you're impacted?
Yeah, I want to know what your ideas is of appealing the quit from the GPO.
Yeah.
I am a retired school bus driver, and when I retired, I lost $500 of my Social Security, and that's not right.
I agree with you, and that's why I'm a leading co-author of the bills to fix it. And let me back up for everybody. What we're talking about is a provision of federal law related to Social Security called the Government Pension Offset and the Windfall Elimination Provision that unfairly penalizes, in my opinion, and Becky's opinion, Martha's opinion, people on certain types of state retirement systems too. And there are a disproportionate number in Louisiana. We're very impacted in this state. So I'm a leading co-author of the bill to fix it, and we need to pass the bill. Probably the best opportunity to pass that fix is not as a standalone bill, because I don't think any standalone, narrow Social Security issue will be passed. It's to have a genuine, broad Social Security debate about what we need to do for the system in a lot of ways, including guaranteeing solvency long term. And so we need to have that debate, that fix, and this needs to be part of that debate, and I'm pushing for that. And there are a lot of folks in Louisiana impacted. You have a quick comment on this topic?
Yes, I'm a retired teacher as well, and I'm in favor of that. How many states are affected by that? Is it just Louisiana?
No, it's not, and there are a lot of states affected, but there are 6 states that are really affected, one of which is Louisiana. So because of the nature of our state retirement system, we're one of the 6 most affected by far. And that's part of the challenge in terms of getting support outside those states, but I'm not saying that's impossible, and it does have impact in other states.
You're right. My question was, why do we send so much money overseas to all these countries who hate us? And at home, we need better health care. We need I want to hear me this morning. We need better infrastructure, and we're paying all these taxes, and a big portion of it is going overseas.
And we also need to balance the budget. Yeah, I agree with all.
Even if we only took 10% away,
yeah.
we could do miracles here, and we could maybe get this budget down, these deficits down, these loans that we have that are really killing us.
Right. Well,
What do you know about it?
I agree with you. Look, I think the ultimate test when we consider any of that is what Mitt Romney said during the last campaign. Is it worth borrowing more money from China to send that money to this country? Because that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing, so let's ask that question. So I agree with you. We need to be far more disciplined and smart about it, and I've been fighting for that and voting for that in the U.S. Senate. Now, let me back up because I don't want to mislead folks. That's not going to balance the budget. We're talking about 1% of the budget, so if you're talking about a 10% cut or even a 50% cut, we're talking about less than 1%. So it's not going to balance the budget, but we need to do it as part of that overall approach.
Yeah, I've listened to representatives and senators before, because I've been fighting this for years, And they tell me, well, you know, it's just a drop in the bucket. But all those drops in the bucket, oh, that's
You're right. Pam Andrews. Pam, where are you? Yes, conservatives have been elected to help repeal Obamacare, or as I call it, the Unaffordable Care Act. We keep hearing they are working to repeal it, yet we also hear this, there's no way it can be repealed. What's the truth? Can it be repealed in its entirety? Great question, Pam, which is very relevant now. Sure, it can be repealed as soon as we can pass the bill to repeal it through the U.S. House. We can do that now. Through the U.S. Senate. But it's real tough now. It's a Harry Reid Senate, 55 Democrats. And get it signed by the sitting president. So obviously, I mean, that's the rule book, that's the Constitution, so that's what we need to do. Obviously, that's real uphill right now.
defund it.
Okay, we can,
I understand the other side. Shut down the government. Shut down the government.
God. We got less than a rich now.
Obamacare and funded the government and then put the ball back in their court and say, okay, this is the law we passed, do what you need to do.
right. Well, by we pass, I assume you mean pass that through the House, and I agree we should do that.
But I admit that if it goes to the Senate's probably being, what you say, 55 Democrats.
Right.
But put the ball back in their court and say, okay, we ain't putting any more money for Obamacare, and we'll fund the rest of the government. And if you shut it down, it's your fault. But you see, the last time it was shut down, I think 1995, the Republicans did not stand up and be counted. We need to stand up and be counted.
I agree with you. We should start by doing exactly that from the Republican House. And I agree with you, they should pass a funding bill for everything and complete defunding of Obamacare.
Here's an excuse to shut down the government. Well, let's see what happens if we do it.
They may in the fall, that's going to come to a head in the fall. Now, beyond that first step, I'll be honest with you, I think it gets pretty tough. So I really want to show of hands because I'm going to be voting on this. If it comes to that shutdown, can I see?
Shut it
Let me ask for another show of hands. Folks who get Social Security checks, you're all right with skipping that for a while?
That's only because they have money. Imagine if there were poor people.
Well, I disagree. I think that Rush to do it, but that's beside the point. So, folks who get veterans other benefits, you happy to forego that for 6 months or a year? Yeah.
Why should we have it?
You're going to hit the Medicare, you're going to hit Medicaid, you're going to hit everything else. Well, you know what? Y'all already hit it. Okay? Somebody stand up and we're going to fight this thing. It's got to be done.
As long as nobody in this room is going to call me about not getting their check, I'm all for it. Thomas Dubose, term limit. Sure. I'm sorry.
Could we cut off funds of the Senate?
If the Harry Reid Senate passes that, sure.
I mean the House. Could they pass the defunding of the funds that are used for operating the Senate?
No, probably not. I think that actually is unconstitutional. You want to talk about term limits?
I mean, Sure, thank you.
Sure.
I recognized in 1776, it seemed reasonable that the term in the House of Representatives was for 2 years, when you left your house and family and came into voting service for the government. In the present day of transportation, we don't need 2-year terms in the House. It seems to me they should put 4-year terms in the House of Representatives, retain 6 years in the Senate, because we represent the entire state. And thank God we have 4 in the executive, and have term limits of 2 terms. And then go home, live with your family, and make a living like the rest of us.
As you probably know, I completely enthusiastically agree with you on term limits, and that's why I have the leading term limits proposal in the Congress. I introduced and passed that to the state legislature. We actually passed it, and I think it's made a positive difference. We have a regular influx now of new, fresh voices, and we've gotten rid of the old crowd that had dominated the state legislature literally for decades, losing most of that old crowd. But if we needed it there, and we did, we needed 1,000 times more in Congress. So that's why I'm fighting for it. I absolutely agree with you. And the key is to get a real grassroots movement revived again. The kind we had when I passed term limits here in 1995. We need that grassroots movement revived again, built around term limits. We don't have that right now. It's not a big push, a big topic. That's what we need to get it done. People said we could never pass it for years. Well, we did, because of that grassroots pressure. Only reason. But we can pass it for Congress if we can revive that on a national basis. And I completely agree with you.
Supreme Court.
Well, we thank you for your
Constitution.
Thank you. Asking about straight talk with the President and Senate and House of Representatives. Yes, sir.
Can't hear you, Senator.
For the President and for the Senate and the House, they're not getting together. They're totally away from each other.
Okay.
The problems that they have in Washington, the first thing is, starting with the President, he's running his mouth too much. He gets on TV, stirs up this, he's stirring the public up of what they're doing. What I'd like to see the Senate and the House is address the President and get all you together. And the biggest thing is coming up in a short few weeks is the money budget for spending. They're supposed to cut the federal. And you're going to say, where can we do this? I can see if you take the room size of the, where they have the, where they have that every year where the President makes a speech. Kick the medium out of it, kick the news medium out of it. Eliminate them completely. Because when they get in there, there's too many people. I see it here locally. The news medium puts it on the news, and the people that have something to say, they listen to the news, and when they go up to the governors or the House of Representatives, whatever it is, they all listen to the medium. They need to kick everybody out of there. And another thing that I know personally is that it's a nice thing to have the computers and all that stuff. Get them out of the way. It's been on television that businesses that had computers, that they were not performing 100%.
Okay. Well, look, I certainly want to get to a solution. I certainly want to get to a solution, particularly on the fiscal mess. And I'm willing to listen to all reasonable ideas. What I'm not willing to do, quite frankly, is just continue same old, same old.
That's correct, that's correct.
So, to me, it's a non-starter. To me, it's a non-starter, for instance, when the president puts forward a proposal with a big tax increase, that's also increasing spending. It's not using all of that tax increase to decrease the deficit, it's actually increasing spending. To me, that's the non-starter. But I'm willing to listen to any reasonable compromise and proposal that's really going to get our hands around this spending challenge, because if we don't fix it, it'll eat us alive. We cannot stay on the path we're on.
The other thing is, I'm saying is, why can't representatives have the speaker go to the president, tell him, hey, look, let's get our act together, get the people together, because I know that our people on the computer, if you don't like what these guys said, you better walk them. You get the people out there and wait for the computer, get them all in one room talking together, you'd be surprised how many people, if you say, oh, I didn't like that guy, after you get to meet the fellow, hey, he's not all this up, you can get more done by talking to people and sitting there and just clicking and walking on. And that's the problem I see. Locally, that's business-wise, nationwide, they're not getting down, sitting down, talking.
Okay. James Stewart, when are you all going to stand up to the Democrats and stop compromising? Well, I think we need to have a little debate here. James, we have a debate with the last speaker. Go ahead.
Y'all always sound like you're going to do a great deal for it, but you wind up rolling over to the Democrats. I thought y'all don't punish these renegade Republicans that vote for the Democrats.
That's right.
Stand away from them.
Well, you're not talking to one of them. I assume you know that, so you're preaching to the choir. And we have those arguments in our Republican meetings all the time, and I make the same arguments. So I hear you loud and clear, and you're preaching to the choir. Is that about this topic? Yes, sir. Real quick.
I've been supporting the Republicans since I was in high school. Okay? I'm sick and tired of receiving telephone calls from Republicans who want more money from me. I've said the same thing to all of them. You know, in the 1830s, the Senate was a lot more righteous and awful than it is now. When is somebody in the Republican Party going to stand up to the president when he makes a statement which we know is a lie and say he's a liar? The nice, polite word, he misspoke. No, he didn't. He lied to me.
Call it what it is.
Call it what it is, and we don't have enough Republicans. The most embarrassing thing in the world was when we put up a presidential candidate that I look forward to a robust campaign against my friend, Mr. Obama, who's a gentleman, who had spent less than 2 years in Congress and had voted less than 10% of the time. How can you call him a gentleman? You don't even know the man. So you started off in the hole there. But I'm tired, you know, when a person lies to you, instead of saying my distinguished colleague from the other side of the house, you say the guy lied to us, folks. Well, and if he is a liar, what's he going to say to you? Is he going to, if he can't back up his lie with some facts, then what's he going to do? He just has to eat it. And you won't call people liars.
Well, I don't know if you follow my actions, my statements.
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about others.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, which is fighting like hell. So I'll keep doing that. Murray Mitchell, where's Murray? Is it too late to stop Obamacare and how? Yes, sir.
A year, and they get away from insurance plans completely. And
I think it's probably too late to stop this train wreck that these guys did, just want to get on.
I don't think it's too late, but I do think we need the right sort of federal elections to get us there. In the meantime, I'm going to fight like the Dickens. I'm going to vote to repeal, to delay, to defund. I'm not going to fund a funding bill that includes Obamacare, so I'm going to fight like the Dickens. The ultimate step to get us there, though, is not how we vote in Congress, it's how we vote in America, starting next year. In terms of that key factor, that all starts with the 2014 election. And guess what? If you were frustrated because we sort of weren't relevant here in Louisiana in the presidential campaign, we're sure as heck relevant in the fight for the U.S. Senate. Because one of the key races will be right here between Mary Landrieu and Bill Cassidy.
What's going to happen to the Advantage deal that we have now?
Medicare Advantage is I want to go to other folks in the room, but quickly, Medicare Advantage took a big whack through Obamacare and took a big funding cut. The Democrats' goal is to phase it out, yes, and Obamacare, unfortunately, is a significant start. Alice Poor, what is the deal of Congress plus staff being exempt from Obamacare, and how can this be? Where is Alice? You mentioned that up front. Does that answer your question? Okay, well, I'm very upset about that, as you are, and I'm going to push like heck to get a vote. I don't know if I'll win or lose, but I'm fighting for a vote so that every member of the Senate can either stand with Washington or stand with the American people. And it'll be crystal clear.
Are you going to accept this substitution?
If there's any way not to accept it, I won't. But under the rule, as I understand it, there's no choice. What there is a choice about is what congressional staff are covered under the exchange. And if I have any say about that, all of my staff absolutely need to go to the exchange, and I've already told them that. Yeah. Luke Laborde. Yes, sir. I'm very interested in having our federal debt reduced or eliminated. We're disinvesting from our children. The debt ceiling impacts dollars we have already spent. How can we prevent the debt ceiling debate from crushing our stock market and further slowing economic growth?
I can be very specific. You know, what happened 2 years ago, we took a big step financially backwards for an awful lot of us. And I understand the goal, but I felt like it was the wrong fight. I can't not pay my credit card bills without filing for bankruptcy or losing my credit rating. I don't see our nation being any different. We got to change the budget. But you know, how do we do this with the debt ceiling on money we've already spent?
Right. Well, I understand your question, but the problem is, in my opinion, the debt ceiling is some of the only leverage conservatives have to demand change. So the way I look at it is, I'm not saying never extend the debt ceiling if it means reneging on our past commitments. I'm saying we're not going to do that until we have a responsible plan moving forward. To me, it's like having a brother-in-law who has a debt and spending problem, and he comes to you and says, look, I have a solution. All you need to do is come with me to the bank and co-sign for one additional credit card. Well, time out. That's not a solution. That's helping him continue his problem. Now, the solution is to get on a workout plan, to get on a responsible spending plan. That has to be step one. And that's what I'm demanding as step one before we increase our debt. So I'm not saying we can just never extend the debt ceiling cold turkey in light of past obligations. I'm saying we need to use it as leverage. We need to fight to require a change, which we haven't seen yet in Washington in terms of spending. Your comment is Manny.
I'm gonna throw them all out and then hear your comment.
Okay.
Not that big a deal. Flat tax. Why not? I think Steve Ford going to flat tax, 17% across the board. No deductions, no.
You prefer that to the fair tax, consumption tax?
Flat tax, sir.
Okay,
Across the board.
you
You
prefer,
earn money.
I'm just asking, you prefer it to the fair tax?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Flat tax. 17%. Steve Ford for closing. Didn't work out. Even Russia, I think, has a flat tax. Works pretty good for them. My second comment is why not defund Obama? You have term limits for everybody, even appointed ones like the Supreme Court. Double taxation on Social Security. I think Bill Clinton in 1993 decided, hey, look, we can't have those Social Security people go without having a tax. So he put one on us. And then when we went to Social Security, we were taxed already, and then we paid into Social Security. So to me, it's a double taxation.
I agree.
Illegal immigration. The basic question is everyone above the law? And if that's the case, then we don't need laws if everyone's going to be above it. So my feeling is that if you broke the law, come in here, send them back. Two words, personal responsibility by every one of us, including y'all. But the problem being is, personal responsibility is out the, we no longer think we're responsible. We blame somebody else. You don't tax me, tax Johnny behind the tree. Personal responsibility needs to come back into our system and our family values.
Okay, let me try to respond so we can get to other folks. I think I agree with you down the line. Let me focus on one of your top issues, tax reform. We absolutely need a fundamentally simpler, fair tax code.
Yeah.
Either that's a flat tax or a consumption tax. I think the devil's in the details. I think you can do both in a good way, and the devil's in the details. And these recent IRS scandals should prove that point. My frustration with these recent IRS scandals is I think most of the discussion is missing the big point. Most of the discussion is about who we need to fire and prosecute, which I'm all for. But I think the bigger point, the even more important point, is that sort of abuse is inevitable on a regular basis if you have a tax system that's that complicated and a bureaucracy that is that powerful. And that's what we need to change, as well as fire and prosecute. Republicans to gain a majority in the U.S. Senate. Is there some yet to be announced plan on another candidate the Republicans have in waiting? Would you say that the current candidates have a 50% chance to unseat the Democrat incumbents? Where is Rick? You want to elaborate? Rick? Yes, sir. Want to elaborate, sir?
Based on the statement you just made about Bill Cassidy, I see that we'll have to assume that you put all your political clout into his camp.
I support Bill. That's what you're asking to go on.
Right. What would you say are his chances of getting that seat? Him personally.
Yeah, right now, if I have to I don't have a crystal ball, but if I had to pick a figure, I'd say it's 50-50. I think it's going to be a very competitive race, very competitive. And there's some compelling arguments to run on, including that Mary Landrieu was the deciding vote to pass Obama. The conservative that came to the United States rather than Mary Landrieu, we would not have Obamacare, pure and simple. That's true. Gene Scoggins, how do we stop the executive orders that Obama keeps making? Yes, sir.
One that they're gonna have an executive order to raise taxes on the home building. Stop this guy.
Dictatorship. Yeah. Well, I agree with you. He's gone beyond his constitutional authority over and over and over. And I'm fighting. Well, Congress could do a lot if the U.S. Senate were different. So that's one hurdle. What I'm doing, since we can't get past that in the U.S. Senate, I'm doing everything I can outside Congress, like participate in lawsuits against a lot of this stuff. And so I'm directly involved in, for instance, the lawsuit, which we're winning so far, about unconstitutional so-called recess appointments that weren't recess appointments at all. Well, the main thing we can do generally as citizens, as voters, is to change the situation in Congress, particularly the Senate. But in the meantime, I'm fighting on every front, including filing those lawsuits and prosecuting those lawsuits, which are winning in some cases, like these recess appointments. You know, not to make excuses, but the challenge is he does this with a stroke of a pen, and we have to try to undo it with a 2-year, $2 million lawsuit. So that's part of that challenge.
Will you lead the charge if we take the Senate to impeach him?
Direct answer. I completely disagree with all of the president's policies. I think he's horrible for the country. But I won't, because I think it would backfire. I think he wouldn't be removed from office. I think he would gain more public support.
From Clinton. How? The way Clinton did. What he learned from trying to impeach Clinton, which didn't go so well.
Suzanne Elmer.
You've already covered it. I just want you to vote against immigration and against the Obamacare.
Okay, well, I'm on your side for sure. James Scott, why amnesty? James? Yeah.
11 billion people on it, and they're throwing Social Security now. They have never paid a penny in Social Security. Everybody here is all down, paying into it. It's supposed to be a contract between the working man and the government. But along comes Lyndon Baines Johnson, and he decided that he wanted to get his hand in that big pile of money. And now I understand he's a $3.5 trillion IOU in there.
Right.
So when the Democrats say, well, we're not out of money, we got to put in. Yeah, they got the Social Security fund to get out of it. And when they put all of these 11 million more in there, they're just draining Social Security now.
Well, I agree with you, and I think the best specific proof of that, there's a very good detailed study done by an expert named Robert Rectors at the Heritage Foundation that says that Gang of 8 bill, because of what you're talking about, because of other entitlement programs, is going to cost us as taxpayers $6.2 trillion with a T, $1 trillion net. And that's one of several reasons why I strongly fought against that bill. Right. Gentleman asked how many Republicans are on the Gang of 8 bill. There were 4 original Republican co-authors. In the final vote, I'd say right about a third of our conference voted for it. So about 15 out of 44. Well, we're halfway there. We're on Social Security, but there's also a congressional retirement system. And by the way, when I first went to Congress, I refused to join that. Have not joined it. We'll never get a penny of those benefits. John, you between the two plans, but I agree with you.
Let's save.
House be able to defund Obamacare. We sort of talked about that. Charlene, you want to elaborate?
I don't feel very encouraged about
Yeah. Well, I'm fighting for it. Be assured of that. You know, I think the bottom line lesson is that elections have consequences. And we all better make darn sure that the next election has consequences too, in the right direction. Nelson, there's conflicting information on funding Obamacare and funding maybe independent of a continuing resolution. And what's your understanding? Where's Melvin? Yes, sir.
Using the continuing resolution, I appreciate your insights on it.
Yeah, this is sort of getting into the weeds, but I think the simple answer is you can defund it, but you can't defund it simply by taking certain lines out of the continuing resolution. You need affirmative language to stop some automatic or mandatory revenue sources from funding large parts of it. That sounds like a lot of gobbledygook, but it basically means you can defund it, but it takes specific language to do that, not just taking certain line items out of the budget. Now that can be done, but you need that affirmative legislation. Sir?
I wanted to bring up a point that I haven't heard brought up on the national scene. I hear the Democrats talk about the war on women. I never hear anybody talk about the war on the elderly. There's been a concerted effort to hurt the elderly in this country by the Democrat Party for a long time. The Federal Reserve, the dollar was worth $1.21 in 2001. 2013, today, it's at 82 cents. That's a 1/3 cut in the purchasing power of the cash the elderly have in CDs. So that's just like taking a third of their money. Second thing is they raise the minimum wage 40%. The elderly depend on minimum wage people more than any other segment of society for cooking, housekeeping, cleaning, chauffeurs, sitters, etc. So they increase the elderly's expenses 40%. Now they turn around and they force the interest rate down falsely, so on their CDs they only get about 1/5 of what they ought to be getting. And then they pass Obamacare, and they've got these death panels, so now they're going to kill them when they don't want to give them what they need. Somebody else say something about, there's not a war on women, there's a war on the elderly. The Democrats are trying to kill you, you better not vote for them.
Bill Oliver, when are you going to charge the emperor with breaking the law? Yes, sir. Where's Bill? Yes, sir.
His attitude, and to show you, I go back, got a bunch of friends in the FBI, NSA. I was one of those kids that helped clean up North Korea after the war was signed over. What I had been told by some of my constituents, number one, I have a friend whose son is very close to the friend of one of the major generals that we had. The general has received enough paperwork, and he was not aware of what it was, but it crossed his desk. And it was many times being asked, what does it cost for you to take this many people and go to rescue this many people in this country? And scenarios of war or rescue efforts. Finally, the general passing that said, that's what they were testing in Bosnia. He has told his son, and they've told all their sons, to tell your children, do not volunteer for military service. Because if you get pinned down someplace, they're going to pass the dollar bill rather than go get you. Now, this is scary, right? This is a 5-star general that told me. Now, second thing is, why do we have to reconcile everything that happens in Congress to affect us? Why don't we have some better leverage to affect Congress? The vote has gotten useless. Look at the people that say one thing, get elected, and do something else. Not by their choice at first, but after a while, they become a member of the ruling class. And you're a lesser person because you voted for them.
Time for an Article 5 Constitution.
Right. Well, the rest of you guys that carried guns to make all this possible, we need to get together and go to Washington in million masses to straighten them out.
Some of those folks also show up at the polls next year, because that's the way to straighten it out too. It's crazy. Bill, if I can have everybody's attention.
Senator, answer his question.
Bill Morgan.
Answer his question.
I'm sorry?
Answer his question.
Sir.
Want to hear what a young dad would say.
Yeah, if everybody can give this guy your attention. Okay, please go ahead, sir.
Mike, I just have a question that's been, asked by many Americans since last year, and what hasn't ever been solved is the injustice done to 4 Americans. I think we all know it's what we were talking about, the Benghazi, is what happened in Benghazi. 4 Americans died, and what difference does it make? Clinton doesn't care, and Obama doesn't care. But all it took to save 4 American lives was to send a little air support. It would have been dealt with. But instead, I just found out this recently, that since Obama likes to go on vacations, one time he left his dog at home. Yet, he sends the Marines to go pick up his dog. How come he can send air support from the Marines to go pick up his dog that's at the White House, but can't send Marine air support to Benghazi?
And now let's go to Bill Morgan. If we can go to Bill Morgan and be respectful to Bill. I know no one who wants it, so why can't we repeal Obamacare? And spending in the U.S. government continues to be out of control. Everyone is aware and promises to fix it, but it seems not to happen. Yes, sir.
You've covered it. Everybody in here is just fitting that in.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I'd add, Bill, is I wish you were right that nobody wants Obamacare. That's not true. And in fact, the other side, who absolutely wants it, most of whom are getting something for nothing, came out in droves in the last election. And our side sat on it. Should laws be passed by Congress apply to Congress? Absolutely. And comment on the federal deficit. Where's Marvin? Yes, sir.
But it seems like, I thought it was a constitutional view that said that you pass a law and not that it has to apply to Congress. You can't accept themselves from the law. And that seems to be ignored all the time.
Yeah.
And then you talk about the deficit.
Yeah. Well, there's there's an equal protection clause, but there's not that specific constitutional provision. I'd be all for it. But this latest example that we talked about is about Obamacare, which I think is triply outrageous. And I'm fighting that like the Dickens, and I'm going to push like heck to make sure we get a vote. I can't promise I'm going to win that vote, but at least it'll be crystal clear where every individual stands. Bobby Fowler, what are you doing personally to repeal the train wreck called Obamacare? Yes, sir.
I think mine is already covered. Probably enough, so it's
Senator Vitter, this young man asked you a pointed question about Benghazi. I've heard enough about the Obamacare, guys. We all know where he stands on it. Here's the thing. He asked about 4 Americans that died. He asked, and I feel like you're passing up a poignant opportunity to answer his question.
Okay, well, I'm sorry that you have felt I'm sorry you've heard more than you want about Obamacare, but it's up to the whole audience to air their concerns. I agree with the guy completely about Benghazi, and if you took half a minute to look at my record, my actions, you'd know that, but I agree with them 1,000%. Okay. Monty Morales. Yes, sir. Obamacare. You're about to insult this guy, but I went on the exchange yesterday and compared rates. Same provider, BCBS's current plan, current coverage. Well, this is a little long, but why don't you explain?
Well, basically, I went in and Googled Obamacare yesterday. Compared the plan that my employer has for me today. Okay. I have a $500 deductible if I pay to go to the doctor. The smallest deductible I could find on any plan was $10,000 for my family. No copay until I pay the $10,000. The rates are about the same. So I've got an absolute plan on how you can end Obamacare. You vote for it, the Democrats will vote against it.
Might work. Let me ask you.
Train wreck. Let's wreck, and they're going to have to answer the question.
Let me ask you.
Enacted October 1st, everything. No exemptions to anybody.
I agree with that.
I guarantee you they're going to jump off that train immediately.
I agree with that. Let me ask you, you said you have an employer.
Same plan. I'm employed and have an employer.
Okay, can you keep that plan? What's happening in the future of that plan?
Well, if I leave, no, I can't. If I don't have a continuous keep my benefits for life plan.
Okay. But is your employer keeping the plan?
As of this time, yes. But I've got notifications on emails that the possibility exists in the future that we have to drop the plan.
Right. Yeah.
You go in, Google it, put in your zip code, answer a bunch of questions about your health history. My wife has an existing condition.
Right.
Should be covered.
Right.
We just won't pay a damn thing until I pay $20,000 out of my pocket.
Right. Okay, Alex Smith. Oh, I think that was Alex, all right. Michael McCaslin. In light of insurance company profits and high individual premiums, what about regulation or tighter regulation of insurance companies? Michael, where are you? Michael, going once? Michael, no. Okay. Eva Morgan, why do we need financial and military aid to Egypt? Military Brotherhood and leadership are so anti-American.
We have strictly about cutting foreign aids. I'm against all foreign aids when our economy is so shabby, especially for Egypt. We know this the government, right now lack of it, it's a shambles, chaos in Egypt, but before the Muslim Brotherhood very much supporting, is being supported by Hezbollah and has connection to Al-Qaeda. And our president goes to Egypt first thing among the first trips to encourage them, to help them to stand up. But unfortunately, these nations are not ready for democracy. So once we know they are anti-American, anti-Israel, anti-Christian, why do we allow them and give them military secrets, aircrafts, that they can use against us and our friends? And why do we give any aid, period?
Well, I agree with all your concerns. Let me just add the update that, several weeks ago, the Muslim Brotherhood was ousted. So it's a different picture now. There doesn't seem to be any good alternative at the moment. So it's chaos and bloodshed. But the Muslim Brotherhood was ousted. John Norwood, asking about, I'm sorry? Okay. Are you John? No. Where's John? Yes.
I was wondering how you stood on the impeachment of the scumbag.
Well, as I said very directly a few minutes ago, I personally think we're back. The rules are this. The House impeaches, and impeachment means filing charges. Then there's a trial in the Senate. So if the House were to impeach, which I don't think they're prepared to do, but let's say they do that, the result in the Senate, in the Harry Reid Senate, is clear. I mean, he wouldn't be removed from office. And given that, I think we have no result in a big PR backlash that certainly the media would welcome. So personally, I don't think that is effective.
All right, and let's say that it is going for the Senate, goes into the Senate looking for impeachment. I would hope that you personally, or one of the senators, would be sure that his unlawful birth certificate would be included in that impeachment proceedings, because it takes care of him out of office, but it also takes care of everything that he has done in office and throw it all
They show the
throw
birth
it all
certificate
out.
from Hawaii.
Right,
It just
I hear
doesn't
you.
look like ours.
I'm not sure that would exactly quell the PR backlash.
I just don't like it because he's black.
But I hear you, all right. Rebecca Light.
No, we're not racist.
I'm not being anybody, but I'm sure a lot of these people are retired and they have worked. But there are also a bunch of people here that I talked to that had to leave their office to come to hear you. Why can't this be scheduled like in the evening?
Right. The simple answer is we do some in the evening, we do some at lunchtime, we do some earlier. But to put them all in the evening, I do so many, they're not enough hours on the calendars. That's the simple answer. I do a town hall meeting in every parish, every Congress. I've done well over 250 as our senator. So the simple answer is they're not what some of my colleagues use, which is to do, 2 in their career. But I'm not going to pivot to that either. Sally Gearhold, explain the ITIN that illegals use to obtain additional child tax credits and abuse that leads to multiple claims. Sally, why don't you explain? Sally?
Well, I just recently read about this abuse by the IRS where they...
Well, why don't you wait for a mic, Sally, so we can all hear?
I just recently read about this abuse by the IRS, whereby these illegal aliens get this tax credit ID where they can apply, and sometimes, many times over, and the IRS is granting this additional loophole, child tax credit, where each child gets $1,000, and they're getting them over and over again, and many of these children live in Mexico, and we have spent $4.2 billion on this.
Exactly. A year.
Yes, and it's increased since 2009.
Correct.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, you're preaching to the choir because I have legislation to fix that. I have a real simple, workable fix to simply require a valid, verified, true Social Security number for any applicant. And that's the big loophole that isn't required now. You're right, there's plenty of fraud in the plan, but the amount going improperly to illegal alien families alone, that's not dealing with fraud. But that category alone is $4.2 billion with a big. That is real money by anybody's estimate. And the IRS itself says we need this requirement to police it. And I'm trying to pass that through the Senate, but so far it's been opposed by either all Democrats or virtually all Democrats. But I'm fighting for it, and I'll keep bringing it up. Yes, sir. Is it related to that?
Similar. I find that Congress is very reticent about shutting down the government. Would you support an organization that would gather together as many people as are here to go to Washington, and is it possible for enough people to go to Washington to shut down the government?
People going to Washington.
Yeah, just
Literally in a
fill up the
government
place
building.
where nobody can do anything. Simple solution, but I bet you it can work.
We are literally in a government building.
Let's go to 2 more and we'll have to wrap up. David Lindgren. Where's David? We can all give David our attention, asking about a shortage of pharmaceuticals, and the expense has grown 400%.
They were generic a year ago,
Yeah.
and now they're tier 4, which is the most expensive tier. So you're looking at, on the tier 4 medicals, something in the neighborhood of $300 a month.
And David, what happened to the generic version?
Well, that's just a lot of oof. I mean,
But there was a generic a year ago, what happened to that?
they say it's not available, but it was a generic. It was like aspirin.
Okay. David, if you don't mind, before you leave, give us your information and the name of the drug if you have it. I'll look specifically into that. One issue, and I don't know if this is involved in this case or not, but one issue that I've been fighting is what's called pay for delay. Drug companies of name brand drugs, in many cases, are settling lawsuits, making payments to generic companies to avoid generics coming on the market, to be able to keep prices high. And I'm fighting that. The good news is there's a recent Supreme Court decision that disallows a lot of that, and I'm still pushing legislation that happens to be bipartisan to disallow all of it. I don't know if that pay for delay is involved in this case, but if you give us the details and your information and the drug name, we'll look into it.
One of the pharmaceutical businesses, military.
Bitter?
No, I don't think so. Let's go to a last question from Stephen Riley. Where is Stephen? In your invitation emailed out yesterday, among issues you discussed is, quote, trying to get rid of Obamacare, close quote. While I acknowledge that it is not perfect, doesn't language like that portray a divisive tone that the general public is sick of? How in the future do you intend to embrace Congress the words of union justice and confidence that are sewn on the Louisiana state flag? Stephen, you want to elaborate?
Well, I'm pretty sure you're well aware of the news, how Congress approval ratings are in the teens, if not single digits. And I mean, I'd issued a complaint before. I've been on your email list, I think, for at least a year. I've been a Louisiana resident for the past 2 years. And as somebody who doesn't ascribe to either Republican or Democratic affiliations, it just, for me, as a first glance, I gotta get rid of Obamacare. It's like, to me, that just sounds like a regress. Let's go back to states that were not as, that were more problematic, I guess. And so, for something like Obamacare, I understand that the majority of the crowd has its complaints, has its issues with it. But, you know, for that being implemented, there was a positive intention to that, to address healthcare problems. So if the first flat-out impulsive solution is, let's get rid of it, that doesn't register for somebody who doesn't have any particular political affiliation. And so I'm just asking in terms of, you know, for what is on Louisiana's state flag. I find words like unity and justice and confidence, I find that inspiring. And so I would hope that for future dealings with people on either side of the political aisle, that there's more of a effort to, you know, work on the positive and work to improve upon it.
Okay. Well, Stephen, look, I think the fundamental deal is we just disagree. I don't think Obamacare is a net positive in any way, shape, or form.
Amen.
I'm going to go talk to the one other non.
I don't think it promotes justice. I don't think it promotes confidence. And I do think a pretty darn important part of my job is to be straight with people. And look, you might not like it, and you might vote against me because of it, but I'm fighting like the Dickens in the Senate to completely repeal Obamacare. Maybe that's not the political thing to say. Maybe it's safer to beat around the bush and try to have it both ways. I'm not doing that because I'm sick of people doing that.
Yes.
Follow up quickly. A quick follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only comment, and again, I know that's just one issue. The hope would be that there's a more agreeable tone on other issues in Congress.
I hope there is too on Harry Reid numbers, but I'll keep working on it. Wait, yes, sir. Final thought. Yes, fine.
I want to check. Bill Cassidy goes to my church, and I told him what I'm going to tell you, and I ask you to consider. How you going to do it? ask you to consider doing just this. Stand firm as you're doing, but to encourage other senators and other congressmen, as I told Bill, it's time to stand firm like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did, and when they said, we are not going to bow down. And that's what Obama wants, that's what all of this is all about. It's time, because if Obamacare gets passed in January, I'm telling you,
Well, I hate to break the news to you, but Obamacare got passed a few
well,
years
what I'm
ago.
saying, it goes into effect. You can't kill the Frankenstein monster. We need to do it now, and it doesn't matter if they call you names or if they say you're doing all this terrible stuff. If, just like Esther said, if I die, I die. We gotta stand up.
Yep, I hear you loud and clear. We gotta wrap up. But thank you all very, very much for coming out. And please, if I can have everybody's attention for 30 seconds, please, this needs to be a continuing conversation. Please keep all of my contact information that's on the handout, and please use it. You have addresses there, phone numbers, my website, which has easy email access. So please use that on a regular basis. And I'll certainly be back to East Baton Rouge and to neighboring parishes